Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is about mental health and well-being at work. What do we need to be thinking about? How much are workers and our businesses affected? Here are some statistics that relate to the well-being of your workforce. 11% of the world suffers from some form of mental illness. 1 in 5 Americans suffers from a mental illness. 40 million Americans suffer from anxiety. More than 150 million people in the WHO European region live with a mental health condition. And only 1 in 3 people living in that area with depression receive the care they need. Employee well-being impacts business outcomes at every level. How can we effectively address prevention and preemptive support relating to mental illness? What should leaders and managers do when they notice something? Are they informed about what specific actions could help a person needing support? Then what happens if someone needs to take time out or days off or longer? What messages do they receive? What expectation is communicated to them, their colleagues and team members, to encourage them to return when they're ready and welcome them back? Mental health support is most effective when it is empathy-based and recovery-focused, with a comprehensive systems approach. Messaging from the CEO sets the tone, but success relies on leaders throughout the company and the fabric of support they create within their team and among their coworkers. So I'm delighted to be speaking about this with Paula Allen, Global Leader and SVP Research and Client Insights at Telus Health. Paula specializes in health and productivity management, workplace and mental health, and total well-being strategies for workplaces. Hi, Paula. How are you?
Doing very well, Sophie.
Well, it's great to be connecting again about some very, very important topics. I'm delighted to be focusing on mental health. I always start at the beginning and how you got to where you are now. You started studying research about psychology, psychometry, and you also did an internship on neuropsychology.
Yeah.
So what influenced these choices and why did you focus on these topics?
Yeah, well, it was a very particular moment. A lot of people move along a path and various influences. That wasn't it with me. I was going to be either a graphic designer or a lawyer. Those are my, creating or arguing. One of the, I don't know what that says about me, but that's sort of the way I was thinking.
Now I'm really intrigued about how you got to what you're doing. Okay.
Well, as many do, I took an introductory psychology course when I was starting university, and I saw an image of a brain.
Okay.
And the imaging showed the brain changing over time. So I observed an actual structural change of this individual's brain. The reason for that change, what had been happening to instigate that change, was the person was under extreme and unrelenting stress.
Oh.
So when I saw that, my head just exploded. I mean, when you think about it, what's more important than your brain? It's not only how you think and how you move through life. It involves all the management of your functions. Like it's your engine, right? It's really the thing. And to have it impacted in a structural way because of emotion. That opened up a level of curiosity that I continue to have. It wasn't so much, I couldn't imagine somebody telling that person, just be strong, and have that change the situation. We had to get a little bit deeper. So that's where my interest really took off in terms of mental health.
Oh my goodness. Well, I want to hear more about that as your journey continues, because obviously that's a very strong thread in terms of where that started and where you are now.
Hmm.
Right after college, you went into disabilities management. Was that very closely related to this revelation?
I have a little bit of an unglamorous story around that. I'd focused on children and worked with children, and I loved that. It was a wonderful environment. I was very, very fortunate to be able to sort of work with children because I believe that that's sort of important for society as well as
Mm-hmm.
I just happen to love working with children. And I worked in an environment where children were very well taken care of. It was high quality clinical care. It was environment as well that we paid attention to, teachers and parents and
Okay.
all the rest of it. And so that was what I was dealing with. And then the unglamorous part is that I was thinking about getting married and I need a little bit more money. So I had a plan to work for maybe a year or a year and a half in another role that paid me a little bit more and then go back to my love.
Okay.
Well, when I worked in this role with adults, Sophie, I was just horrified. The way adults were treated when they had mental health issues in the workplace at that point in time, it was it went counter to everything that I knew was helpful. It
Right.
felt, more cruel than
Mm-hmm.
anything else because people were marginalized and isolated and, are you faking it or like
And
it
stigmatized.
was pretty bad. And I couldn't wait to sort of get out of it. And then I heard one of the prior CEOs from my company, really make a statement in front of 300 people at a conference saying that he thought that things weren't good enough. He
Mm-hmm.
thought that the workplace wasn't doing the right thing. He thought that providers weren't doing the right thing. He felt that, again, like I did, that people who are on disability for any mental health issue or even struggling at work were really not getting what they needed. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, the system was making things worse. So I said, I got to call this guy. I got to call this guy. So I did. I literally just
You
called
reached
him
out to the
up.
CEO.
I did.
Nice.
Yeah, sometimes when you're young and you don't
Yeah.
realize you can't do stuff, right? So I called him up and we talked, and then he said, "Okay, well, do you want to change that?" And I said, "Of course I do." So that's how I actually started with this company. We worked
Wow.
on a different approach to disability. So I've been continuing along the journey to make things better ever since.
Wow. Love
Mhm.
that. He must have been a little surprised to get your call.
I think he was a little flattered. A little. It was. I was quite honestly floored by what he said because it was just such raw honesty. And I said, "This is somebody that I want to know. Like I just and I want to tell him that I think he's absolutely right. Things aren't good enough. I really didn't have a sense of needing to change it at that point, but I was glad to have
Mm.
the opportunity." Mm.
And then when he gave you the opportunity or
Mhm.
catalyzed in your mind that you could be an agent of
Mhm.
change,
Yeah.
how did that then start to change your vision of your career trajectory?
Yeah. Well, what we had the opportunity to do is to really redesign from the very beginning. So if you're in a system and you have to kind of retrofit what you're doing, it's a little bit harder.
Hmm.
But if you have the freedom to say what should happen, that's glorious.
Mm.
So, at the end of the day, I would say it was empathy based service design. You know, you
Mm.
you look at what's happening when somebody is struggling. What's happening? What do they need? They need the things that we all need as human beings. They need to feel safe. They
Hmm.
need to feel valued. They
Right.
need to feel that they'll have support. They need clarity because when you're in an anxious state, the last thing you need is somebody who's going to communicate in a way that's confusing.
Hmm.
So we made sure at its base that we were giving people what they need. And then that allows the clinical work to really come to fruition. That
Mm.
allows the conversation to happen
Right.
around, giving people hope that they're going to get better. Because that actually, Sophie, that's another thing. At that point, 20 years ago or so, when people were off because of mental health disability, they were sort of labeled almost like a burden. So there was two paths that what happened. Either they would be found out to be faking, which nobody fakes, right? Like,
Hmm.
or they would just stay off on disability forever.
Mm.
What was critically important is that we introduced a self-fulfilling prophecy and had the attitude that people were going to get back to feeling more like themselves, to being productive. So all of these things happen. So that's the base of it. And then you build processes to make sure that that happens in a consistent way.
Starting at Telus Health, it sounds like the mental health aspect was already threaded in. Were you starting systems wide to see what overall needed to change, or starting the fundamental data gathering and analysis because it was early on in this process?
Well, I started with a passion around mental health, but then, when the organization expands, and even in disability, you get a broader view, right? Because, you have to make sure that your systems and processes work for all types of illnesses.
Sure.
And Sophie, it did. So, our outcomes were better when you have that empathy-based approach for physical health, because again, there's an emotional component to just about everything.
Sure.
So I had that bias. I had that broader experience in terms of disability and what worked from a systems point of view for all types of health issues.
Right.
But then I had various iterations of my career, and very fortunately, started in a place where we were able to have that broad data. And I work currently right now with data scientists. Wonderful opportunity. And we were able to validate that with the data. When you look at drivers of productivity, if you look at drivers of absence, if you look at drivers of turnover, if you look at drivers of innovation, collaboration, really strong workplace culture. You look at all of those things, and you look at personal health, every aspect of personal health and well-being. Guess where you end up coming back to? Mental health and well-being.
Right. In the early days, what were some of the surprising aspects that you discovered with the support of the CEO and this emerging recognition that well-being was important? There weren't that many companies, certainly 20 years ago, who were paying attention to this because there was a cost involved in it. Could they spend the money to experiment without knowing for sure whether it was actually going to lead to better outcomes, unless it was a personal conviction of a CEO?
Well, there were levels to it. So first of all, by taking this empathy-based approach, by taking a recovery focused approach and having an expectation that people would go back to work, they did. So that reduces not only the human cost, but it reduces the employer's cost. So right from the very basics, we ended up showing better outcomes by doing the right thing. Then you start looking at, when you're talking about disability, that's kind of the end of the parade. You start looking, a little bit further up. Was there anything that could have happened to prevent this person from getting to the point where they were in crisis and needed to stop work and get less money because they were stopping work and having challenges to their identity because of all of that? And looking upstream, very interesting things happen. So even before, I got involved when mental health really was kind of taking off as a disability driver. But when we looked at patterns, we actually found that there was a really interesting correlation between that increase in mental health disability and the decrease in middle management. So we went through that kind of recession, and middle management was decimated, and spans of
and not getting training either.
And not getting training. Well, think about it. If just not having that support is important, that means that support has to be the right type of support. Right. So it kind of started this whole thinking process around the role of the supervisor and the importance and the value of having that strong support. Somebody who can give you support when you're doing work, can show you recognition, can actually step in. Because we did another piece of research that was interesting. And this is the early on stuff. We asked managers who had people who were off work, when was the first time that you got a little inkling that this person might, go off work? It usually doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And we expected to hear things like maybe a couple of weeks, a month, maybe 2 months at the most, 18 months.
Whoa. Okay.
18 months.
Had some of them said anything, or that was not the thing? You didn't say anything, or maybe you inquired of a coworker of theirs to say, is John okay?
They didn't know what to do. They just didn't know what to do. So most did nothing. And some did things that they thought were kind, like, taking away stressful projects and stuff. But be careful of that. If you
Right.
do that to an individual without having a conversation with them, because think about it, somebody's feeling a little bit vulnerable, and then all of a sudden their manager doesn't invite them to meetings or things that are stressful. It actually creates more anxiety,
Sure.
as opposed to having a conversation around how can I help? What do you need? So it really sort of helped us realize, number one, managers kind of get a good sense. They're not clinicians. They don't do
Right.
diagnoses, but you can tell when there's a behavior change, and they themselves felt very stressed by not knowing what to do. So we solved for that. Manager training became an important part of the whole system.
Managers typically don't get the training they need, get promoted into a manager role because you're great at that job. You're now in a completely different job and not really given any training to do that job well. Now that job becomes that much more complex. Having to take on your whole team's well-being is another layer of training that needs to be done. When we have flatter organizations, you have fewer managers, they're dealing with a changing environment and this emotional well-being that is becoming such an issue. What do we do? This is a very complex issue to be dealing with.
It is, but just because it's complex doesn't mean that we can't deal with it and shouldn't deal with it. As a matter of fact, it's becoming more important right now. So, there's all sorts of reasons, and we've had organizations take this really to heart. Mm-hmm. And say, well, I need my manager, like their job is to help make sure that their teams are productive. The teams are not going to be productive if they don't feel safe, and their teams are not going to be productive if their well-being is not in a good place. Like, we're not training managers to be, clinicians or psychologists, or as a matter of fact, we're training them to stay away from diagnosing and going too far and being counselors. Right. We're creating them to create workplaces that are productive, and healthy workplaces are productive. So we've had organizations say, okay, this makes crystal clear sense. We are going to actually embed it as a mandatory part of management training. So it's not just, I'm going to attend a lunch and learn and whatever. And to be honest, one of the first organizations who did that ended up seeing a massive decrease in their mental health disability claims. Mm-hmm.
A core piece of it, which doesn't surprise me at all, is really fostering and nurturing a culture which is trust-based, empathy-based. What are the other elements to the environment that you're helping companies develop that's going to nurture the team members, and how are you helping managers manifest that culture, which is so important for their team?
It's absolutely part of the support. There's two aspects to, the kind of interventions that are helpful. Mm-hmm. One is the environment, right? And even the Surgeon General of the United States came out with a paper around the workplaces, and what was mentioned was the reset that we've had in terms of our collective mental health since the pandemic. Like, all that strain, all that stress, uncertainty, isolation, all of those things the human mind doesn't like, and impacted us as a group more than what you would realize, has reset our mental health to a more negative state. And very wisely, he said, part of the solution has to be multi-pronged. Like, this is like a team sport, but you cannot ignore the impact of the workplace, because the workplace is where people get their identity and spend a fair bit of time. So part of it is creating that healthy workplace, getting leaders to sort of understand how they can be helpful, showing them the data to validate such, and training managers. And there's a number of things that we can talk about there. But the other that we can't ignore is help for individuals.
Sure.
Right? We have to have both. It isn't like one or another. You can't say you have a 4-day work week and you're done with it. Like, that's ludicrous, right? Like, there's things that people are experiencing, and just as in physical health, we know that we need levels of support. We need coaching to help people understand how to self-care. We need to make sure that they have access. We need to make sure that there's early intervention in order to keep people physically healthy. We need to immediately get to the point where we put as much or more focus on our mental health. And I would lean towards more, because I have the data that will show you that your physical health is not getting better if your mental health isn't in a good place.
For sure. I just saw this data from 2023. 64% of US employees are struggling with their mental health, but only 19% use their employer mental health benefits.
Yeah.
Is that primarily to do with stigma? And the fact that resources aren't confidential enough? How can that change if so many are not taking the benefit of resources that are actually offered at their company?
Yeah, well, it's a couple of things. I mean, there is still stigma in our society. It's quite tragic, actually. And even when something is confidential, even when people know that it's confidential, if there is a sense that the individual will be stigmatized, they reject the label of need, or what they perceive to be a label of even having to need help. So it does directly impact people's willingness to go out and seek help. So again, high quality, confidential services, but if people feel that environmental stigma, then they're less likely to actually seek help. People even, have self-stigma. Like, it's not that even anybody around me is going to discriminate against me or anything of that sort. But I can't accept that in myself because of decades of ridiculousness in our society. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is very practical. Some people don't even know how to get the help. They don't know the first step. They might have heard about their benefits and services when they first were hired. And, it's just not repeated. We have to market it better, for sure.
And it's very interesting to me what you said earlier on, which was that if it gets to that stage where the preemptive support hasn't been there, or they haven't felt it, or they haven't received it, they take time off work. Then reintroduction, if there isn't hope, but also the grounded assumption, yes, of course you'll be back, or yes, the intention is that you're going to be back. That's really interesting in terms of the psychological expectation from the manager and also from the employee about themselves. That's really a joint goal that is so critical from the team as well, because I can see how much that would change the outcomes.
It's super powerful. It's very powerful. So think about what often happens. Somebody is off because of, people call it stress or whatever. They give that label to every mental health situation. And because of stigma, the leadership might say, oh, we don't want to, maybe we shouldn't contact that person. Maybe they're too fragile. If we contact them, maybe it's kind of, when I say stigma, it's not like direct stigma, but it comes from the same place, which is lack of knowledge, right? What people need is to feel that they are valued. If you say, listen, just go in a corner and rest, right? How does that person hear it? What they see, what they hear, what they feel is that they are forgotten, right? Think about this. Like, if you have a child who is struggling, and I kind of going back to that, do you say, well, we're just going to not talk to that child anymore and just let them meditate, let them just, no, you want to make them feel that they are a part of something, that they are cared for. So, in a practical sense, the manager just reaching out, hey, how you doing? Just want to let you know that we're thinking about you, and, hoping you're getting better. And, whenever you're ready to come back, we'll be thrilled to have you back. Like, that's a very different conversation than somebody just, feeling like they're cut off. So there's very practical ways that people can show empathy. There's very practical ways that empathy can make a positive difference.
And going to the cultural aspect of it, there was data from the Conference Board which said that 26% of US workers say that the toxic work culture impacts their mental health. So when we're talking about creating a supportive environment, maybe a long way away from where the environment is currently, how do you try and address those situations, which may not be company-wide, it may be specific managers, executives?
Well, there's some very basic things that sort of need to be in place as well. Like think about the concept across the world of occupational health and occupational health legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the premise of that is that I go to work, I do work, I create value, and you give me money.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it. Like,
Right.
I create value for you, and you give value to me. What is clear as well is that relationship should not put me at greater risk to my health. So in a physical sense, we have legislation that says organizations need to take steps to manage in a clear and due diligence approach ways that employees are not exposed to undue risk as a result of doing work. The same thinking is there for mental health, right? Like we shouldn't separate them at all. You shouldn't go into a situation and because of that employment relationship end up being damaged. So at a very minimum, things like harassment, things like discrimination, things like, people just being treated in a very disrespectful way.
Right.
Those things, there's no organization that can't say that they can't manage that. And if they do that alone, they'll be in a better place. And, Sophie, as well, it will benefit them. Do you think that employee who's working in a toxic workplace is bringing their full innovation, their creativity,
of course not.
that they aren't looking for another job every 2 minutes? Like it's obvious to me. One thing that I do want to say though, is that people better catch up, right? In terms of the employee support and the organization, in particular the manager training and behaviors. So those two things are important now. I would predict that going forward, they will be absolutely critical success or failure points. When we have this sort of AI environment, when we are having the pace of change in personal lives and in work lives, accelerate, when we need people to be at their A game in terms of innovation, in terms of collaboration, in terms of customer service, in terms of all the things that we bring as human beings, because AI is doing the other things, then you better have an approach where people's well-being is well supported.
For sure. We were talking about artificial general intelligence in the conversation that I had just recently with Dan Mapes about all of that change. How much are companies asking you about resilience, just giving people a foundation that they can build upon and feel anchored in this time of incredible change? Because I do see that it's being very challenging. And one of the things, as we've talked about in the past, which is unsettling for the youngest employees, Gen Z and younger millennials as well, that there is so much that is changing and there's some stability and change because there's so much change and we're getting used to it. But for now, there's still volatility, still the constant evolution is unsettling for people. How do you see that playing out, your concerns, and how quickly we really need to be addressing this?
Well, I think the good news is that more and more organizations are really proactively saying, what can we do? We know we need to do something. We did a poll of organizations of a number of different sizes and industries, and 51% actually said that they wanted to be leading, not just on par, but leading in the area of mental health. And again, what I'm saying, if you're really kind of paying attention, intuitively you should know that your people are, that if people aren't in a good place, then you're not going to be in a good place as an organization. Right. The pandemic made this pretty clear, but there's also data. So one of the things that organizations have started to see is just some interesting patterns in their benefits claims. So drug benefits, for example, you mentioned the younger age group, and the increase in use of mental health medications for the younger age group is much higher, a much steeper slope than any other group. Our own research has said that, those under 40, so not even super young, but, under 40, compared to those over 40s, twice as likely to have symptoms of anxiety that interfere with their daily life, twice as likely to have symptoms of depression, 1.5 times as likely to feel a sense of isolation. And also, interestingly, younger workers are more likely to perceive stigma in their workplaces than older workers. Okay, so let me go back over and say that again. So it's not necessarily that they're holding attitudes that reinforce stigma.
Right.
They're able to pick it up in their workplaces with greater acuity because and that's important. That is important because it means that group is more attentive. It means also that they will react to it more. Because remember what I told you about, when people have a sense of stigma, it impacts their behavior.
Right. I do see and hear and discuss with younger employees, they have the language, they do talk much more openly about their struggles and share where they have issues and how to deal with and support each other in that. And I think that is very helpful, and they'll be sensitized to other people who are going through those issues or the environment. I've seen, some interesting data in terms of how they feel. They're very aware of environments which are detrimental to their mental health, which are part of the conversations they have when they're interviewing for a job in terms of work-life balance. Is this going to be an environment that is going to be supportive if I join the company?
But there's also very real changes that are happening, and one of the things that sort of I find very, odd, is when people say, well, we're seeing more issues in the younger generation because they have less stigma. They're talking about it a little bit more. Well, they might be, but you know what? If we're seeing more hospitalizations, hospitalizations aren't that dampened by stigma, and we're seeing more of that. We're seeing more impact in terms of people's cognitive functioning because of feeling overwhelmed and stressed. I mean, there's indications that say that it's not stigma and reduction of it that's causing the increase in what we're seeing.
Oh, for
There's
sure.
actual change. So we have to understand that. Like, this is like a big point, because if you kind of, fluff it off, then you're not doing what you do. You're not taking the accountability, either personally or as a leader, to make things better. You are allowing risk to fester.
Yes. I mentioned it quite often because it was a very impactful article that I read in the Wall Street Journal in 2019, which was saying that because of automation, that the graduating class of 2019 would be doing work that was 3 to 4 years more advanced than previous generations. So when they're coming in, not necessarily receiving education at college yet that is really on point with whatever job they're going into. So that's one thing we need to be thinking about. But also in terms of how they are being prepared or supported in understanding what their job is. There's much less routine work. They're needing to do this more sophisticated cognitive work that they aren't necessarily quickly getting the support and training that they need from their managers. Is that something you are seeing, and what reactions they're getting when they're onboarding? Do you have some research on that? That would be really interesting.
Well, what we do see, that support thing is sort of important, right? Like just making sure that people, like, when you think about a healthy workplace, you have a sense of belonging, you have a sense of control, you do get support, you feel safety, and you do feel equity. Like, those are sort of the things from an environmental point of view. But remember the two sides. There's the support in terms of the system, but let's talk about the actual support.
Yeah.
So I can't speak about the business support to help people sort of adapt to AI, although I probably shouldn't because I'm not an expert, but I'll make a comment on it.
Sure.
I think that the winners in this AI are going to be not the ones who are most technologically adept in terms of the level and quality of the generative intelligence, but those who can apply it in a way that works with humans the best. So I'll put that to the side. We can talk about it if you want, but that's one comment.
I hear you. I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
Okay. But think about support and think about what I just said. We are not talking about younger generation being snowflakes. That I don't like that term. There's no evidence of that. Whereas not, all of that stuff is just people making excuses for a difficult situation.
Yeah.
We are talking about a society that has gone through rapid change that is not helpful for our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
We have faster pace of change. Human mind doesn't like that. We have greater uncertainty. Human mind doesn't like that. The biggest mitigator for stress and compromises to our mental health is other people, social support. And we have never been more isolated than we are right now. So there are many things that are creating the situation that we have. So let's just understand that we have to play the ball where it lay. So how do we play it where it lay? We can't keep doing the things that we were doing before. We can't wait till people break down and then surround them with psychiatrists. We have to have a systems level intervention to make sure that we are training and coaching and encouraging people to think about their mental health differently and to approach life a little bit differently. So one of the things that we have picked up is that we are seeing increases in difficulty with procrastination, difficulty completing tasks, difficulty absorbing information. These are all symptoms of an overwhelmed population.
Right.
And about 50% of the work population in our data is on an ongoing basis having some of that difficulty, feeling disorganized, finishing tasks.
Oh, that's high.
That's very high. And that's typically not where we would say, okay, well, we need to sort of bring in somebody, but we need to do something, because here's what happens with that path. People are feeling overwhelmed by their lives. It's coming across in making it difficult to do things that they want to do and they're smart enough to do and they're motivated to do, but the brain is overwhelmed. We worked with a research hospital and who, interestingly enough, was doing work with aging individuals and dementia, but that loss of executive function, those symptoms in terms of being, those were the same. And they had interventions, and we adapted those interventions, and we're getting success in applying those interventions in a kind of a coaching, cognitive behavioral fashion to help people manage this expression of being overwhelmed. The symptoms themselves, just being able to manage that is super important, because if not, think about the next step. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling disorganized. I'm troubled by my procrastination. How do I start feeling about myself? My self-confidence goes down. What happens to my anxiety? My anxiety goes up. It puts you down a potential path. And what I'm saying is that this is just one example of how workplace support, workplace systems, starting off in just playing the ball where it lay in terms of how people are being challenged before they get to the point of having full-blown anxiety and depression, is become very, very important.
And it takes us really full circle back to that original neuroscience that you looked at those pictures of the brain. We had the pandemic, which was an incredibly stressful situation. There was a lot of rawness and mutual support, which was extraordinary and wonderful to see during some of that period. And much of that has faded away. But there's both lingering trauma and a lot of lingering mental health issues. And without proper support and some interventions and modeling good behaviors and helping create those cultures, there could be this structural change if people are not helped enough as we go into further ongoing evolution and change.
And happily people are starting to actually just accept that and see it. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Stockdale paradox, right? But I always found that was interesting. Okay. It's where, the paradox part of it is that, we always try to say that optimism is healthy and, a good thing. But if you have irrational optimism, the likelihood that you're going to, face a situation and essentially just crash, because, your world gets sort of burned apart is quite strong. So it's really about, you can't, if you see something that is not so great, right? And you say, well, I believe tomorrow it's going to be better. And you have this sort of, push it to the side because everything's going to work out. I'm not going to work. Then you are putting yourself at risk. If you see this situation and you say, okay, what do I do about it? That's a different type of optimism. That says, what do I do about it? infuses, I can do something about it.
Sure.
What do I do about it gives you control. And what do I do about it helps you to actually do something, which is likely to make the situation better.
Exactly.
So when organizations say, when we say that the mental health of the working population has been reset, believe us. Let's talk about what we do about it.
Right, exactly. Preemptively, I will say that I am very supportive of flexible working and distributed teams, and that helps people do their best work and be able to focus and deal with all the different situations that they have in all its individual characteristics. And we also need to be aware and thoughtful about the potential isolation. And there are ways to deal with that. And people nurture their local community, as well as obviously having a strong work community. What are you seeing in terms of causation, challenges with isolation, and what can be done about it in organizations that really do believe in distributed teams and supporting those hybrid work models going forward?
I think we do need to have sort of a total mental health approach to all of this. I do think some of the opportunity that organizations have is to help educate their employees around what does and doesn't make a difference,
Mm-hmm.
and to create cultures that actually foster positive behaviors. So,
Right.
The idea of when you have such powerful information
Mm-hmm.
that isolation is a negative factor in health, physical health, as
Mm-hmm.
well as mental health,
Right.
as well as productivity,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't ignore it.
Sure.
And I'm not going to make a comment on whether somebody should, have a policy that people are in the office or whatever.
Absolutely.
But whatever you do, you make sure that people do not feel alone. You
Yeah.
make sure that people feel connected to your workplace. You have team meetings that are small enough that people can't be on a screen with the camera off and not be visible.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you just have to have that knowledge, and that's a guiding force. That if your employee is feeling isolated in your workplace relationship, you're going to pay for it, and they are going to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's things like that. But even getting back to the types of supports that people offer,
Mm-hmm.
typically the benefits that are offered by organizations are largely reactive.
Yes.
You get sick and we'll help you get better. Even the disability management that we were talking about in the beginning, people had to go off work before they had all of this sort of support. What I would say is bring everything forward. And again, going back to that comment of having a system where people see their mental health in the same way that they see their physical health. So if I know that I need to take care of my nutrition. I know that I need to think of things in a way that's productive as opposed to black and white. I know that I need that social support. I know I need all of these base things for my mental health because I happen to have the advantage of learning that.
Right. Yeah.
We also know that we need to eat right and exercise and whatever. We also have that advantage of learning that. So, but most people don't have the same level of knowledge as their physical and their mental health.
Yep.
So let's start there. The next thing is when I feel a pain and my pain doesn't go away, I seek help. And I might have one visit with my doctor or a physio or whatever, and they help me and I move on my business.
Right.
They might see greater complexity, in which case I'm so grateful for that early contact because I know that my outcomes are going to be better. Why wouldn't we have that for mental health as well?
Right.
So all of this, but there's another problem here though, Sophie. If we continue to offer it the same way that we're offering right now, and that one step of support is offered by a clinician, and, we don't have enough for our society right now. And that's where those clinicians need tools, need technology, we need platforms, we need things that we can have a one-to-many type of approach, but have that same thing that, if I feel off, I'm not going to wait till I'm burned out. I'm going to make sure that I nip it in the bud.
Yeah. Yeah. The leaps and bounds that telehealth services seem to make during the pandemic It seems to me from the outside that can be something that's very helpful for people. It's easier to get an appointment and make that appointment, or at least see someone without having to take so much time off work to be able to have that early intervention.
Without question. Mm-hmm.
Paula, what haven't I asked you that I should have done?
It's so wonderful always to speak with you, Sophie. I've asked a lot and made me think about things that I didn't come into this conversation thinking about. But I don't know if there's anything that you haven't asked that I think is critical to know. But I do think it's important for people to understand that there's levels to this solution. Mm-hmm. Like when people say, okay, well, we need the clinical world to sort of do better, or employers to have better environments, or employees to take action and have no, it's not one or the other, it's all. Right. And it all starts by saying, listen, we're human. And part of being human is that we have different vulnerabilities. And guess what? Because of different things that have changed in our lives and our society, right now we're having a little bit more mental health vulnerability. A little while ago, we had a little bit more physical health vulnerability when we stopped, walking, and we had machines and stuff, and we did something about it, or hopefully most of us did, and we started to exercise and be aware. We have to take this bull by the horn, because it will get worse, not better, if we don't, because the pace of change is increasing and the challenges are increasing. But we can do better.
Yes, we can. And my last question is always, Paula, what can managers, leaders, and team members too who are listening, what can they do this afternoon, tomorrow, that take those first steps to helping their team, to helping themselves too, because they can't be a good leader if they're not actually taking care of their own mental health? What are the first practical steps that someone can take?
So with all the technology that we have in terms of medication and clinical and, the technologies and programs and everything, I would say that what each individual needs to understand is our best source of resilience is relationships with other people. Social support is the core of everything. There is really no way that you can feel resilient if you don't have a sense of belonging in some sort of group, if you don't have connection with at least one other human being. So if you as an individual are feeling off, I would say reach out to someone else, a friend, family, talk. You don't have to talk about what the issue is, just be connected. And on the other side, make other people in your life understand that they're important and keep connected to them.
Well, appreciating you and our relationship, Paula. Thank you very much for that beautiful comment, which is so important, because you know how much I care about empathy and how much I do also think it's that human connection, that human understanding, which is really the basis and core and foundation for all positive and productive and grounding and healthy human interactions and human relationships. So thank you for your time and sharing all your history and all these insights and the research and what you're doing. So much appreciated.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks again so much to Paula Allen, Global Leader and SVP Research and Client Insights at Telus Health. You can follow Paula on LinkedIn and find out more about the offerings from Telus Health at telus.com. The research Paula mentions is referred to in the show notes. Immediate action tip. Our best source of resilience is our relationships with other people. Social support is the core of everything to feel a sense of belonging in some group. If you're feeling off, reach out and talk to someone. You don't have to talk about the issue itself. Just be connected. On the other side, let people in your life understand that they're important and keep connected to them. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. And even write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research, and information, you can follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Until next time.